there is such clear reasons why women with PCOS have such high rates of eating disorders. This is an interesting way and an important way to understand PCOS is that
if you struggle with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, this episode is going to be for you. I'm going to be talking with Drew. He is a guy that I've been following for a while, and he does a lot advocacy for women with PCOS. And I'm very interested to ask him a lot of questions all around why he actually started doing PCOS and how we can develop some true and false and overrated, underrated questions all around PCOS. And there's a lot of people that want to know a lot about this. So stay tuned, ask anything if you do have any questions. I'm going to invite him right soon. And I am super excited to until he joins us. In the meantime, we're going to be debriefing or doing a general questions. And there he is. I probably just skip right straight. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm very excited to talk to you and having this amazing chat about PCOS. And I have so much questions for you.
Good. I'm excited to answer them, and hopefully I can provide some value.
I am sure you will. Now, the first question I want to ask you is, who is Drew? Why PCOS? And why is this your biggest point of interest and advocacy? You're a man, so this has to be super interesting to now understand.
Definitely. Yeah, so if I think about like any negative comments I get on social media, it's always, you're a man, what would you know about PCOS? And look, I have so much respect for those with PCOS. Obviously, on a personal level, I don't know what it's like to have PCOS, but I have dedicated my life to learning as much about PCOS as possible, understanding the plight of those with PCOS, and trying to find answers for those with PCOS. So my journey with PCOS started back in 2014 as a personal trainer. So I'm a little bit different in that sense. You know, if you follow a few PCOS pages, mostly dietitians, nutritionists, doctors, endocrinologists. I'm none of those. I come from a fitness background. I was a personal trainer. And I started working with, it was one client with PCOS, and she got me intrigued in it. She just, you know, for her, she couldn't lose weight at the rate she wanted to. So she asked me to look into PCOS. So that's what got me into it. Before that, I'd never heard of PCOS. I didn't know what it meant. And I thought, you know, if PCOS could impact your weight, surely I would know about PCOS already, because even before starting on this journey, I loved learning. I loved, you know, doing my little bit of research into, you know, fitness. I was learning about protein synthesis and the Krebs cycle and carbohydrate metabolism. So I loved learning already. But when I started learning about PCOS, you know, we implemented some changes into her program and she started losing weight. And I was like, wow, like, you know, how could this condition actually impact someone's ability to lose weight? That really interests me. And at that point, I had a Facebook page for my personal training business, and Lana, my client, said, why don't you, you know, make a little, you know, because I made one post a day, why don't you post about PCOS? So I posted about PCOS, and the engagement was just far more than any engagement on weight loss, you know. And the thing that stuck out to me, and I can still envision it now when I close my eyes, is it was the type of messages. You know, when I ran, you know, when I was a personal trainer, the type of messages were, you know, I want to lose 10 kilos because summer's coming up, or I have a wedding or a holiday, which are, you know, they're great goals. But when I started talking about PCOS, they were talking, you know, these women just opened up to me. They were talking about having multiple miscarriages and, you know, having issues with their relationships due to their self-confidence. So it just meant so much. So from there, I kind of moved more into a personal training business specific to PCOS. And then we ended up launching supplements, because I feel like supplements can play a vital role in an overall holistic plan for PCOS. They're not magic, but I believe they can do wonderful things if they're a part of an overall plan. And that led me to where we are now, which is obviously I run a supplement brand that allows me to do what I do. But for me, my biggest passion is creating content. So on a daily basis, I learn, I study, I read all the latest research papers. I try and watch as many podcasts and YouTube videos as I can. I try and read as many articles and books as I can. And anything I learn, I share on my social media. And that's kind of what I do. That's who Drew is, just a regular guy who just loves learning about PCOS, sharing that knowledge. And I feel like, yeah, just on a personal level, I always wanted to do something with my life. You know, I always wanted to achieve something, I had real self-esteem issues in my late teens, and I just always wanted to feel like my life meant something and I meant something. And I just feel like, you know, I'm happy to learn about PCOS and share that knowledge. And I feel like I can really help people. And that's what's really inspiring to me.
One of the things I love about your page is that you do show that you care, but also there is the intention to try to bring the most truth and the most evidence-based nutrition and tips for everyone who is struggling with this in this particular condition, because it is very challenging, can be very isolating. I think nowadays there's a little bit more attention to this condition than before, that there was the doctors didn't even have a clue to how to address this condition or how to provide some correct advice. And there was a lot of confusion around what do we eat, what do I do, just eat more, eat less, exercise more, exercise less. So there was a lot of confusion and a lot of restrictive messages around, you have to eliminate this because you have insulin resistance, so you can't have sugar, you can't have carbs. There's a lot of things that pretty much brought these women to feel, I'm hopeless. There's no way I'm going to get out of this. And what's the point of living with this, all of these different things happening? So I've got a couple of things that I want to address with you.
Sure.
The first section are a few general questions that were gathered by some of your audience, some of my audience wanting to know a bit more about PCOS. And then we have a section of true and false and a section of overrated, underrated. Because this part, I love to talk about how many, they're very controversial, so I love to hear your rationale behind your answers and those things. So are you ready?
I am.
Okay, so the first question within this first section of general questions is, for those who don't know, what is PCOS and how is it generally diagnosed?
Great question. I like to, one of the things I like to do is make things simple, because I completely understand that if you have PCOS, it's not a condition you ask for. So you may not really love to know the nitty-gritty details. So the easiest way to think of PCOS, even though it is more complex than this, but the easiest way to think of PCOS is a condition of your hormones. So it's a collection of hormonal imbalances. And those hormonal imbalances are often insulin, androgens, which is a group of hormones. So we're talking about testosterone, DHT, DHEAS, estrogen and progesterone, because PCOS impacts the menstrual cycle. But that is the easiest way to think of PCOS. It's a collection of hormonal imbalances that then has roots in many symptoms. So the way PCOS is generally diagnosed at the moment is through the Rotterdam criteria, which is where you meet 2 of the 3 diagnostic criteria. So number 1 is irregular periods. So that will generally be 8 or less periods in the last 12 months. Number 2 is physical signs or blood tests showing hyperandrogenism, so high androgens. So those physical signs could be hirsutism, so the excess growth of thick, dark facial or body hair, could be hair loss. It could even be something as simple as acne, which I think leads to the overdiagnosis of PCOS. And then thirdly, it's polycystic ovaries on an ultrasound. So On older machines, it's generally over 12 follicles or cysts on an ovary. On newer machines, it will be over 20. So if you meet two of those three, so high androgens, irregular periods, or polycystic ovaries, you can be confirmed for a PCOS diagnosis.
Okay. And what are the common symptoms of PCOS, and how do they vary from person to person?
This is what I really like to explain, because for most with PCOS, you mightn't have a friend or a sister or someone with PCOS. So you kind of only know your symptoms. And I feel like as much as the medical industry is amazing, and I thank God every day we have it, I'd rather we have it than we don't have it. For conditions like PCOS, it's just not ideal. And that's the thing, if you've ever been to the doctor, I guarantee none of us have ever been to the doctor's office and been the only one in the waiting room, right? It's always packed. Doctors don't have time to sit there for an hour and explain everything for you. Doctors really have 10 or 15 minutes. They want to get you in, test you, send you to a specialist, or give you a medication, which for many conditions, that's life-changing and life-saving. But for PCOS, it's just not ideal. So the education there just isn't there for PCOS. So very common symptoms of PCOS. And, if you're watching this, let me know in the comments if you experience these. But very common symptoms will be excessive daytime fatigue. So the excess growth of thick facial or body hair loss, brain fog, poor sleep, whether that's sleep insomnia, sleep apnea, or actually, I read an interesting study not too long ago about women with PCOS had less effective sleep. So you could get 8 hours of sleep, but wake up tired and exhausted, which doesn't really make sense. But then there are also things like weight gain, which I hope we get into, because I truly do believe weight gain is a symptom of PCOS, but probably not in the way most people think about it. Like depression, anxiety, mood disorders. These are all symptoms of PCOS that a lot of women with PCOS aren't told could be connected to their condition.
I think you are on the right place, saying that there is so many different symptoms, and not everyone is going to experience the same, and that's why it becomes very challenging. Now, is PCOS primarily a hormonal disorder, or are there other underlying factors that play a role?
Yeah, so this is interesting. I want to explain it in a way that isn't going to confuse people, because I completely understand, most people listening don't have a base understanding of, the hormones and the, endocrine system. The easiest way to think of it is a condition of your hormones, but there are underlying drivers. So if you're talking about the most common underlying driver is insulin resistance, which isn't necessarily a hormone condition. Insulin resistance is more of a metabolic condition, but it triggers hormonal imbalances. So insulin resistance triggers high insulin. And this is an interesting way and an important way to understand PCOS, is that generally speaking, when one hormone goes out of balance, it will impact other hormones, and that's called a hormonal cascade. So if we talk about PCOS, what's a very common one? Well, insulin resistance will trigger high insulin. Now, in the female system, high insulin will cause high androgens, primarily high testosterone. That then throws out the menstrual cycle. So then if your menstrual cycle isn't regular, you're going to have dysregulated estrogen and progesterone. All of this will have an emotional toll that can upset cortisol. Cortisol can then further upset insulin, right? Insulin and high androgens and cortisol will impact your habitual behaviors. That then can worsen insulin, right? So this is that vicious cycle. So, high insulin, high testosterone, dysregulated estrogen, progesterone, high cortisol, worsening insulin resistance, worsening high androgens. So although it is primarily and easily thought of as a hormone condition, we also have to understand there are other factors. Chronic inflammation is one. Oxidative stress is another. Insulin resistance is another. So they are the underlying, drivers that are causing these hormonal imbalances that are causing these symptoms. An easy way to think of it is an iceberg. above the water is your symptoms. These are what you're experiencing and these are what you understand. Below that is a collection of hormonal imbalances. And then below that further is these underlying drivers that are driving everything in the first place.
Couldn't agree more with that. And I want to ask you, this is a very common question, and I think a lot of women with PCOS will experience or struggle with this. Fertility and PCOS. How much is PCOS likely to affect fertility?
Yeah, so this is a really sensitive topic, and you know, I have utmost respect, you know, because even personally, I know this on a personal level, it does affect fertility for many. The leading way it affects fertility, though, is that it causes irregular periods. So we have to understand that, you know, for you to have the best chances of falling pregnant, you ideally want to be ovulating regularly and know when you're ovulating so you can time your intercourse. So we know in PCOS, around 70 to 80% of those with PCOS aren't having a regular period, and that is because they are not ovulating. So PCOS largely causes a novulatory cycle. So if you're not ovulating regularly, or if you're not ovulating at all, you know, I speak to women every single day who haven't had a cycle for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. You know, if you haven't had a cycle for 12 months, yeah, that means you haven't ovulated, means you can't fall pregnant. So that is the main way PCOS can cause fertility issues, is it, you know, essentially blocks you from ovulating regularly. The good news, obviously, is though through a holistic treatment plan, you can ovulate regularly, even with PCOS. Not ovulating is a symptom of PCOS. So like any symptom of PCOS, it can be improved. If you improve these hormonal imbalances through a nice lifestyle routine, you can ovulate regularly to give yourself the best chance of falling pregnant and having a healthy pregnancy.
You mentioned lifestyle modifications. That includes diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, and most things as well. How does this truly impact the management of symptoms with PCOS?
It's everything. It's everything. If you look at the general standards of treatment for PCOS in 2023, the first line of treatment should always be lifestyle modification. And that's why, you know, you can just get a bit weary of any doctor that wants to prescribe you birth control or metformin without also saying, look, try and make these changes, because you can really get on top of your PCOS through natural options alone. Now, metformin, birth control have their place in certain situations, of course. Metformin, like, I'm a man who loves the science. Metformin is proven to improve PCOS by improving insulin and blood sugar. So they definitely have a role. But look, if you're talking about the best and most effective way to improve your PCOS, and this will always be individual, right? Because PCOS is a very individual condition. That means everyone's treatment plan should be slightly different and individual. Doesn't mean they're going to be huge changes, but they're going to be individual. There should be an individual nature to your treatment plan. But if you want to improve your PCOS, look, eating specific to your PCOS, you know, exercising. So in terms of exercise, like resistance exercise, walking, sleep, having a sleep routine is hugely important. That's an area of focus for mine at the moment. Doing what you can to reduce your stress levels, and maybe looking at 1 or 2 targeted supplements, you know, for your specific PCOS. But if you're that holistic plan of nutrition, exercise, stress management, sleep quality, maybe 1 or 2 targeted supplements, you can honestly make such life-changing improvements to your PCOS by following the right plan. I just feel like, you know, to date, too many women with PCOS have just been told, you just have to lose weight. Like you would know, being a dietitian, like, that can lead you down so many roads. Like, there are so many crazy diets out there. The 800 diet, the famous 1200 calories a day diet. Like, if you have this condition you don't want and it is affecting you on such a personal level, you're told that losing weight will fix it, you're going to do anything you can to lose weight, which often leads people down crash diets or just attempts to lose weight that aren't healthy for them in the long run. Because, you know, by doing certain diets, like, you can damage your body worse than when you started. So that's what I like to preach. You know, losing weight for many will be part of it, but it could also be, doesn't have to be the sole focus of your plan. You know, if, as I said, the goal of improving your PCOS is by having healthy hormones. Healthy hormones aren't necessarily achieved by going on a crash diet, eating 800 calories a day. So, but in terms of what's going to be the most effective strategy for all, it's going to be some sort of combination of natural treatments, you just said, of lifestyle modifications.
I couldn't agree more with that. Mindset for me is big, it's huge. If you can approach someone who is struggling with a mindset, with a relationship with food, and you can include movement, you can include management of your stress, quality sleep, those things are going to give you a much better foundation, that if you're good and better in that place, then maybe losing weight can add additional benefit. And sometimes by default, just by doing these things, your weight improves without trying too hard.
Yes.
So I think it's just a matter of understanding the human that is in you, like understanding what is going on and trying to address the underlying challenges that are happening just beyond weight. And I am truly a proponent of understanding the whole picture rather than just going straight to the cookie cutter plan of, okay, you need to move more, lose weight, and that's the way it goes. So that doesn't work.
Exactly.
Now, moving forward for you, Drew, what are some of the most common myths and misconceptions you have found that are still currently around affecting women with PCOS, being diagnosed with PCOS, and are the first few things they hear they have to do that are totally untrue, that they could be doing something much easier, much better, and they are most likely complicating things by these advices?
The first one I would say is that the answer to everything is weight loss. That would be the first one. And yeah, I'm just trying to find a way to explain that, because for many, losing weight will help. It's just, for me, it's more the way you lose weight, which we just spoken about then. I think there's, there is such clear reasons why women with PCOS have such high rates of eating disorders. And I think a big one of it is, again, you have these symptoms you don't want, and you're told that the answer to all this is simply losing weight. Just leads you down roads that aren't healthy for you in the long run. So yeah, that one is one of the biggest ones, is, you know, just need to lose weight. I just wish they explained, all right, here's a healthy way to do that. Although, and here's, yeah, one of my favorite words is like sustainability. You know, because PCOS isn't a condition that you're going to cure by an 8-week weight loss program. It's just not. This is a condition that, you know, unfortunately you will live with. So you better make sure that your plan is sustainable and enjoyable. So you want to do it long term, you know. So it's not like, because that's the thing, I've never heard, you know, again, as a dietitian, how many times have you heard someone say, I can't wait to start this diet and I'm going to be on this diet forever? Like, the term diet immediately says it's going to be something short term, you know, because diet has those negative connotations. So yeah, that dieting is good for PCOS. I just don't believe that in that sense. Another one would be that women with PCOS can't get pregnant. You know, I think that's especially painful. You know, I made a post about that last week, and I had multiple women say, you know, I was 14 when the doctor diagnosed me with PCOS and told me I was never going to fall pregnant. And that's the thing, at 14, 15, 16, most people aren't looking at, you know, having children, but still, it's just such a wrong thing to tell to someone when it's not true. You know, just because you have PCOS doesn't mean you will never have children. Now, there are certain conditions and everyone's different, and maybe certain people don't want children, or for another reason they will not have children. But just that diagnosis of PCOS means doesn't mean you will never have children. And then probably the biggest one, but again, this one has caveats too, is that birth control fixes your hormones, which, you know, we know now birth control doesn't fix your hormones. It provides you with synthetic versions of hormones. And I speak to women every single day who, for them, birth control has been a godsend. So I'm not here to demonize birth control, but I think just the way it's prescribed, that, you know, it will give you a regular period and it fixes your hormones. And, you know, so many women taking PCOS think they have a regular period now because of birth control. That's not a regular period. It's just a regular bleed. So that's probably a big one too, about just the way hormonal birth control is kind of sold. You know, again, not demonizing it, not promoting it, just saying that it should be, women with PCOS, when you're prescribed birth control, I just wish they were accurately informed about what it does to the body.
Totally agree. Now, you mentioned something about fatigue, and I think this is a big one. Why women with PCOS are more prone to be so fatigued? You mentioned and highlighted some of the underlying issues like poor sleep, which is affecting their recovery and actually having quite a good quality night sleep. But are there any other things that are getting in the way?
Definitely. Like many things with PCOS, and this is why treatment is difficult, diagnosis is it's difficult. This is why PCOS is difficult in general. It's multifaceted. So it's not like, and that's why PCOS is a syndrome and not a, you know, not a disease, because it's not one set pathophysiology. It's not like this does this and that's why this happens. It's like there are so many potentials. But in terms of fatigue, which is so common, and I just want to, I'm guessing most people watching this do have PCOS, but for anyone that doesn't have PCOS, including myself, like fatigue from PCOS is not the same as being tired at all. Like fatigue is different. Like it is fatigue. So there are a number of common triggers of excessive daytime fatigue in PCOS. Number one is insulin resistance. And that's because the cells of your body that need the nutrients from the diet aren't getting those nutrients because insulin isn't working as it is. So the cells of your body are essentially starving in a sense. So, you know, like you, when you're starving, you're not full of energy. So number one is insulin resistance. Number two is chronic inflammation. It's like when you're sick, you're often tired. You know, when you got the flu, you're often tired. And a big reason of that is because your body, your immune system is fighting the infection, right? And that means all your resources are going to fighting that infection. So you get tired. So chronic inflammation. Also vitamin deficiencies. And this is where I really enjoy certain supplements, because deficiencies in vitamin D and magnesium are both linked to chronic fatigue. And those two very common deficiencies in PCOS. Then also poor sleep, as you mentioned. Like it is so common to have just the worst sleep, which makes zero sense. If you're tired and fatigued all day, then you get to sleep and you can't sleep. Like that is a whole level of hell that most people can't understand. But then also, and this is a fact that I want to speak on, is how living with PCOS can impact your habitual behaviors, what you do on a consistent basis. Like if you're fatigued, it's very, you know, it's common that you're going to be skipping workouts or not going for a walk because you're tired. You can't be bothered going to the gym. And like, you know, if you're not training, you're not exercising, that can impact. And also your dietary choices. Again, PCOS can impact your appetite regulation system. So if you got increased hunger and decreased feelings of fullness, like we all know, like if you're starving and cravings, it is very hard to control cravings day in, day out when there's no finish line, right? So insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, poor sleep, plus chronic cravings and fatigue to cycle itself, that is the perfect recipe for someone to be chronically tired.
Yeah. And one of the things that are associated with PCOS as well, and I think you kind of brought it up initially, is being more prone to experience mental health challenges like depression, anxiety, binge eating. I have had a lot of clients with PCOS that had a history of eating disorder and mostly binge eating or bulimia. And this is mostly because of all this nonsense advice that they get given in the first place. You can't have gluten, you can have sugar, you better go vegan, you better go keto, stop eating carbohydrates, lose more weight, eat less. Like there's so many restrictions, but there is no avenue. Like, okay, so what do? I just don't eat anymore. So what is your stance on being more prone to these particular things when it comes to mental health?
Yeah, the research is very clear. The last systematic review I read found that rates of anxiety among those with PCOS is around 40%, which is like scarily high, and depression was around 36%, clinical depression. So both rates of anxiety and depression are significantly higher than those without PCOS. And the current train of thought is generally there's going to be two compounding factors. Number one is that these hormonal imbalances of PCOS can impact levels of serotonin and dopamine in the brain. But then number two, which is probably the most impactful aspect, is simply living with PCOS. You know, we spoke about earlier about the symptoms of PCOS. You know, if you're, growing facial hair, if you can't lose weight for the life of you, but you really want to lose weight, if you're fatigued, if you're struggling with your sleep, I made a post not long ago about libido, so it can impact your personal relationships. If you're losing your hair or you're struggling with acne or the brain fog, it's like those symptoms are hard to live with. That's not going to be fun for anyone. And especially as I just touched on before, it's like for many, there's no finish line. It's not like you can just take a pill and it fixes it and there's a cure and, oh, perfect. It's like, no, there's no finish line for many people, even though, obviously you can manage it. So if you stack all of those symptoms day after month after year, and the fact that, you're like, what am I going to do? So many people feel hopeless in this. I think that's the biggest reason why mental health needs so much more awareness. And I just feel like it doesn't get that awareness at the moment. It was probably only 10, 15 years ago that mental health in general, like we just smile, just cheer up. Where now we know mental health is like serious. And I hope that translates into PCOS, because that's the thing. If your mind's not right, if you're not happy, if you're struggling with anxiety and depression, that's way more serious than having a broken hand or a broken bone. You can get on with life, but if you're struggling up here, that can hold your life.
Yeah. Now, can PCOS symptoms be effectively managed during menopause? Because that is like an extra thing that women get. And how does this hormonal transition will impact PCOS?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Obviously, women are born with their lifetime supply of eggs. So the research I read was that women with PCOS will generally go through menopause 2 years later. And that's likely due to the fact that if you're not having a regular period, you're not using those eggs on a consistent basis. And menopause itself can be, especially perimenopause, it's a very volatile time. You're having extreme highs and lows of estrogen as your brain and your ovaries are still trying to have a regular period. So it's, if it's not finding those follicles, it's sending down more follicle stimulating hormone, or maybe you're having like large amounts of estrogen, your progesterone's dropping. That also has impacts on your testosterone. So perimenopause especially can be such a volatile time. But as we've spoken about just before, if PCOS is driven by insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, menopause, PCOS is still going to be there after menopause. It's not like, if you go through menopause, PCOS will stop. Unfortunately, it won't. PCOS will still be there. But, I mean, can you still effectively manage it? Yes. Is it going to be easy? Likely no, because just managing menopause by itself isn't easy. So chucking PCOS on top of that doesn't make things any easier. You can manage it. Again, very similar rules apply. It's going to be that holistic plan that we spoke about earlier: nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management. All of those things are just going to make that transitionary period as easy on you as possible.
When women transition to menopause and there's been a kind of like clear picture that you are now in menopause,
Yep.
what happens when now officially estrogen and progesterone are no longer being functioning the way they would normally do if they are currently already coming with irregular periods and irregular estrogen and progesterone? Does using HRT make any difference, or being on a pill makes any difference? Just managing things better, those symptoms get better, or they still kind of around the same intensity frequency as much as when you are in pre-menopause?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. The conversations I've had with different women is, again, it's very individual. Many of them have said, you know, it's essentially the same after menopause. Some have said their PCOS improved. Some have said their PCOS got more severe. So we have to understand that most of the negative symptoms of PCOS don't come from unbalanced estrogen and progesterone. Not undermining those imbalances, they do impact you, especially around the menstrual cycle. But if we're talking about, like, you know, fatigue and weight gain, those two hormones can impact those. But generally speaking, we're still going to have issues with insulin, with testosterone, with cortisol. So it's very likely that it will continue to be what it is. So if you're doing the right things and improving your PCOS and taking all the right measures, you know, things will likely continue. If you're not doing anything, you know, symptoms may get more severe. But yeah, again, it's very individual, but I believe it doesn't make a huge change because many of the symptoms of PCOS aren't driven by estrogen and progesterone. They're more related to insulin, cortisol, and androgens.
Talking about androgens, is there any way that you can naturally, or strategies to drop your androgen levels in a way that makes your PCOS more manageable, especially when we're thinking that this is one of the highest that can reach in terms of like overall different hormones? This one is going to potentially cause the worst symptoms.
Definitely. So let's wind back. So androgens are a group of hormones, you know. So some examples of androgens are testosterone, DHEAS, dihydrotestosterone. So we shorten that down to DHT. So the symptoms, and I think I made a post about this yesterday. So the common symptoms of high androgens will be hirsutism, will be hair loss, will be acne, will be depression, anxiety. So those symptoms, because they're so visual, like, you know, growing facial hair, you know, losing your hair, they're such visual symptoms. They can have the most emotional burden. So the thing we have to understand about high androgens, they are a result of an underlying driver. High androgens in women don't just happen, they are a result. So although you can do things to specifically lower androgens, some of the ones that I like to talk about are, you know, omega-3s, whether that's through diet. So foods high in omega-3s will be things like salmon, chia seeds, flax seeds, or you can get that through obviously omega-3 supplements. Zinc is wonderful, 20 to 30 milligrams of zinc. The key really to effective management of high androgens is making sure your plan is focused on the root drivers, right? So if you have insulin resistance as part of your PCOS, the most effective way to improve your PCOS holistically is going to be by improving insulin resistance. Because as I've spoken about before, insulin resistance causes high insulin. High insulin triggers the ovaries to overproduce androgens. So if you're looking at the root cause there, it's that insulin resistance. So if you can base your PCOS plan around improving insulin resistance, that will naturally lower androgens. And then you're not only improving all of the symptoms that come along with insulin resistance, you are also going to improve all of the symptoms that come along with high androgens. So that's the key way. Of course, in your plan, incorporate things to lower androgens, as I've just spoken about, omega-3, zinc, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, salmon, all of these type of things, but really focus your plan on the underlying driver because that will yield the most results.
Got it.